I'm delighted to introduce our colleague, Dr. Julie Williamson, as it says here, is Senior Lecturer in Human-Computer Interaction, Computer Science, and I'm delighted to have people from all the different salient backgrounds feeding in to this network in general, and it seemed particularly important when we're looking at the technology to get those in industry and computer science, telling the rest of us who are maybe predominantly but not only philosophers and academics out with those fields a bit more about what their concerns are, and I think this is perfect for that. So I'm delighted to have Julie and Mark from that corner of the world in to help us. Anyway, I'll hand over now. Thank you, Julie, and you can take it away.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I'm really excited to be talking with everybody today. My background, as Neil said, I'm in computing science and human-computer interaction. But throughout my career, I've been kind of primarily concerned with some of the more social factors of immersive technologies and basically working towards this possible future where we have, always on immersive tech following us around in our lives. So there's a lot of open challenges that kind of come there. But I will start by just kind of giving a bit of an introduction, how did I even get to care about immersive technologies and where I'm coming from. So as I said, I'm in the computing science department and my background is HCI. And that's for me been really a blend of computing science, sociology and psychology with some design and fine art kind of thrown in as well. I originally did my kind of PhD work focusing on social factors of whole body interaction, so quite relevant for the future for me. But looking at, if people have to use their whole bodies to interact with an interface, what are they not only able to physically perform with their body, but willing to perform as well in public settings? There's a kind of third part of this as well, which is what can these devices that we're using actually detect? So you need to have this kind of a combination of able to be sensed by technology, able to be performed by people, and willing to kind of actually perform that in a public and social setting. You can make the best, I love to pick on Magic Leap, you can make the best, mid-air pinch gesture in the world as used in many AR headsets. But if people are not willing to perform that gesture, it's never going to become an actual interaction. A lot of the technologies that we have become totally dependent on, things like, for example, capacitive touch sensing, it's been available since the 1960s, right? It didn't become an actual thing that we depend on constantly in our lives until HCI figured out the way to make multi-tap gestures and multi-tap and kind of touch-based interactions feel good. So it's not just what's the technology capable of, it's also what are we willing and able to perform using that technology. And finding that good partnership is where a lot of HCI research exists. So after I kind of spent a lot of years thinking about gesture, I realized that social aspect is the most interesting part of that work. And so I moved into kind of non-planar displays and public displays, and VR and other immersive devices became a natural progression. So I've always been really concerned about finding that intersection between what technology is capable of doing, or when we're thinking about immersive tech, often will soon be capable of doing, and what are people doing in real public settings with that technology. So it's a constantly moving target, but also it keeps everything fresh and interesting. So I want to start with this photo, and it is dark and it is blurry because this is at a pub, maybe a bar, more accurately described, in the city center. And this is my friend Will in a VR headset out having drinks with me. And the reason why I like this image is because although you can't really see in the background, most of the people in this bar are wearing headsets. Now this was during the Glasgow Short Film Festival, and this was a piece that was actually made by some of my other long-term collaborators, Dennis and Debbie Club, and it was a virtual theater that you could go step into and watch a series of short 360 films. And film festivals are a really interesting place for immersive technologies, just because it is a place where people who don't have a headset, maybe they've never tried VR before, or they've never engaged with immersive tech, they can go into a setting where everybody's wearing headsets. So a lot of the social barriers are kind of not there. But this was now several years ago. I think this was Short Film Festival 2018. And I just really liked it because it was the first time when I'd been out in a public social setting. We were all wearing VR headsets. I think amongst the table, we had 2 headsets for 4 people or something like that. And of course, we're having a laugh, we're joking, kind of the usual things you do with people when they're in VR. You poke them and laugh at them and take funny photos like this. And it completely worked, right? Everyone in the whole place was doing this. And it kind of was this opening, of VR for me of, this works because it's a specific setting. How do we make this work when I'm not at the short film festival? How do I make this work when, there's not some special event going on? And so a number of us in Glasgow and some of our colleagues as well around the world, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And some of these are more like social experiments, kind of a breaching experiment or something. But here we did a workshop actually in Glasgow a few years ago in 2019, looking at what were some of the social challenges of using VR in public settings. And of course, it's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, this is something where we're still definitely breaking some of the social norms to run this event. This particular headset is the Oculus Go. So as Neil described, this has 3 degrees of freedom tracking. So you've got kind of positional or rotational position and yaw, but you don't have position. And in this case, so it's very well suited for a seated experience. That's the kind of human dynamics that match this device best, since you can't walk around. And in this case, we went to this restaurant, which is called Strip Joint. And we all went and had our lunch and wore these VR headsets and, talked about different things and kind of had fun. These headsets weren't especially well suited for this. So this was before the Quest, and we have pass-through views. But in this case, you're kind of blocking reality. But because we were doing this social experiment, we just forced our way through and kind of tried to make it work. I mean, and as you would expect, this led to a lot of awkwardness. The waitress had a very hard, job trying to deal with us doing this. A lot of people in the restaurant were wondering what we were doing. Even some kids came up to us and let them play some games on the headset. But it was one of those moments as well where we kind of uncovered a lot of the issues that come out when you use a headset like this in a public space. Kind of classic method, by breaking some of the social norms continuously, we can see the effort people put in to try to reestablish them. And so this was kind of one of the experiments, I say that loosely, more experiences that we had. We had other people in the workshop walking around Glasgow. We had one person kind of act as a busker with this headset on. We had all sorts of different types of interactions you might have in the city, but with the face, occluded with the headset. So it's opened up a lot of interesting challenges. And one of the things I really like about Quest, which we've been kind of doing over the summer, I'll talk about that a bit later, is actually playing with the pass-through view, which gets us a little bit closer to something a bit more acceptable in a public setting. But there's other ways that VR and AR can actually be incorporated in public. And this, for one side, is the kind of wearable side. This is the opposite side. So this is kind of installed permanently in a public space. So this was some work that I did with my colleagues in Swansea, University of Swansea, and also looking a bit at kind of local heritage. So the project is called Telescoper. And the idea here is in Swansea, there's a historic copper works. And this was hugely important to the development of the region. It employed huge numbers of people and was historically very important and a source of pride, for the community. Much like, for example, shipbuilding in Glasgow. And as a side note, we've kind of done sister projects to this, looking at the shipyards as well as lost kind of industrial heritage. But the copperworks site, as it stands now, most of it is gone. So some of it you see is redeveloped, like this mall in the background, and some of it is just derelict buildings. So there's a lot of kind of history lost. It's not coming back. No one's going to rebuild the copper works at this site. But we thought, AR that is actually situated on a site, this is the early adoption scenario. This is the easy win, the kind of killer app. So what we did is we actually designed, this actually was using Gear VR, and we've got some refinements on that since then, which I'll talk about. But we built an enclosure for this, which is designed to be left unstewarded on this empty lot, actually. And if you look into the headset, you see the site of the Copperworks as it looked when it was in its prime. So you see some of the buildings, you see there's a kind of famous engine that was there running the Copperworks, you see the engine and some kind of AR style prompts telling you what this stuff is. And this was our first kind of attempt at doing this. We didn't in the end install this permanently, but the kind of follow-on project is going to be permanently installed next month. But the thing that was kind of nice about this, and I know Neil also mentioned this a little bit in ways that when we talk about AR, at the site, you're facing the other way from this way this image is taken, you can still see the two chimney stacks, the last kind of 2 bits of this site that are in any way still standing. And when people look through the headset and they see these 2 buildings and the chimney stacks, what was so exciting about this was that people looked up out of the headset and were like, those are those chimney stacks. This is what they really looked like, which was so exciting to see and really, made us really happy about this. And qualitatively, we also got a lot of really nice kind of feedback. People told us stories about their relatives who had worked at the Copperworks, and a lot of kind of nice ways of bringing some life to what is otherwise a derelict and kind of grubby post-industrial site. And as I say, this enclosure was designed to be permanently installed. You might notice there's a few, one major issue with this enclosure. It was designed by a man who's about 6'3", and it works very well for him at this eye level. It does not work for most other people, which was part of the kind of reasons why this particular enclosure got retired. But moving forward to the next version of this that we did, I'll show this. There's no good live version because it's not installed yet. But one of the other sites in Swansea that, again, was hugely important was the Victoria Station that was there. And it was part of a key train line that kind of connected Swansea to kind of other key parts of the country. It was eventually kind of demolished and a mall was put there. But we wanted to use the same approach to kind of bring that history back. And in this case, kind of improve on our previous prototype substantially. So this example uses an actual by the book, augmented reality approach. So we use a camera at the front that has got binocular vision and depth sensing. And this site of the station is situated and lined up with various parts on this redeveloped walkway where this will be installed. And everything that you see here in this image that's black will be the pass-through view using this camera that we'll be using. So that's installed on the front of the device. And it'll show the train station, as it was before it was demolished and turned into a mall and a swimming pool. But one of the things that I like about this and what we're going to be evaluating when this gets installed next month is that this is a public space. It's a kind of redeveloped raised walkway and arena, which you'll note as noted there. But the people who will be walking by, who will be around just in this kind of public park, will be implicated in this display. They'll be visible on the display. They'll be shown walking under the trussed roof. They'll be there. And also, we'll actually be manipulating their image a little bit. They will be shown wearing, in this case, hats appropriate to the time period when this train station existed. So that's for a bit of fun. It's nothing very serious, but the implications are quite quite serious there. And we hope to see a lot of playful behavior, people, walking around in front of the camera, but also recognizing this is going to implicate people who maybe don't want to be part of this. So it'd be really interesting to kind of see how it unfolds, how people react, what type of thresholds we actually want to set for what counts as the play area and what counts as not. And that's going to be something that'll be really interesting to see once this arc opens. The other kind of key challenge with this work, which is relevant to some of the things Neil and I have been thinking about, is also because this is part of a public park and part of the Swansea Council's redevelopment of this space. The entire enclosure and content of the display needs to be fully accessible. So it had to be usable by people in a wheelchair and kind of had to be in Welsh, had to be in English. There's a number of requirements that the council put on this. And so we had really this kind of horrible experience of our previous one, also in just being way too tall anyway. But we ended up having a kind of super over-engineered enclosure that can go up and down and is safe. It can't, cut off your finger if you try to like put it down too far or something. And that took a huge amount of effort. It's actually been maybe half of the overall effort of the entire project was engineering a display that actually also then satisfied all the accessibility requirements of being installed in public. So it was surprisingly, as I say, a substantial part of the effort and posed a lot of challenges anyway. So for this installation, we've got two versions of this. One is kind of full AR, as you would expect, immersive AR, using a kind of custom headset and this camera. And the other is a more handheld style, although it's not handheld, it's on a strap, it's on a strut. But this is a kind of flat screen that you stand in front of rather than put your face in. So we've got a couple different iterations of this. It'll be installed in a few weeks in Swansea, but it does give a good example of AR that is ready to actually be out in a public setting. But we're getting closer and closer when it comes to wearable devices as well. And this is certainly where my heart lies as well, this idea of kind of always on, always with me, immersive devices. Then the form factors are getting much better. The kind of previous image that I'd brought up of us in the restaurant, doing the same event again with something like a HoloLens would be dramatically different. We wouldn't have this same sense of kind of isolation and of occluding the face. That was one of the biggest challenges in that on that day, was not only for ourselves being unaware really of what's going on around us, but also for the people around us to not know whether we were attending to them or not being aware of whether we can see them or not. And in that case, it was definitely not. But this type of device is a real difference from something like Oculus Go. The kind of second half here, what I want to talk about is some of the kind of key challenges that I'm grappling with right now and thinking about kind of social uses of immersive technologies. And for the moment, especially when we're thinking about something that's more continuous in terms of how much virtual and how much physical content you're incorporating, understanding how those transitions between physical and virtual are experienced, not only for the kind of user, but kind of spectators, other people who are implicated. This for me is the kind of interesting challenge at the moment. I've got a short video just to show you what I'm kind of talking about. This is a commercial product. It's the, I forget the number, KM8 something keyboard. This is Logitech's mixed reality keyboard. And you see my hands here, those are my hands in VR. And as I move close to the keyboard, my actual hand appears. I mean, that's my hand. You can see my rings and that kind of thing. And so there's this kind of moment, where my physical hands are coming into the virtual. And it's a kind of question, that's there, is how is this experienced? At what point, are these always my hands, even though sometimes they're a virtual representation? At what point does the kind of view of my hands come through, and how does this change what we're experiencing? This is one example. I just like it because it's nice and simple, but we're going to be seeing more and more and more of these types of interactions where virtual and physical is blended, and the kind of space where that's happening becomes continuous. So shifting between layers of reality and kind of different modes of reality is going to be more and more common. So I like this as a device. It's so simple, but I think it really shows what it could be like if physical things are coming into the virtual and virtual things are coming into the physical. It's here, it's working, it's already starting. So one of the projects that we did, there's a kind of quite a lot of stuff going on in this project, but I want to talk mostly about how we design the transitions from physical to virtual. So this was some work that I did in collaboration with National Theatre Scotland and Glasgow School of Art. And we were looking at how could you meaningfully actually incorporate virtual content into live performance. There's a lot of exciting things to be done in that space, but it's very hard, not only to make the virtual content feel a bit often tacked on and not really well integrated, but the transition is a bit bleak. It can be very jarring to enter and exit virtual reality. And if you're trying to create a narrative with a kind of interesting flow, that moment where you're dealing with the tech can just be distracting beyond imagining. So we were tasked, how can we make this feel a bit more seamless, actually make it feel like part of a larger experience? So in this case, there was a number of different kind of bits of the live performance. This is one part of it. And once you entered into the actual area, there was a bit of a live monologue and two rooms, a black cube and a white cube. Based on kind of how you went through the first part of it, you would go into one of these rooms. And in the rooms, this is where the virtual kind of part of the experience happened. But the key thing that we decided in terms of how we make this transition work was some really simple hacks almost with these headsets. So one of my colleagues has a really great saying that I always like to remember, is what is the first thing you should see when you go into the holodeck? You should see the walls of the holodeck. You shouldn't go in and immediately see some alternate reality. It's too jarring, it's too upsetting, it's too difficult to experience. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we ease the transitions. And in this case, when you went into a room like the white room, you sat down with everybody there and experienced this together. And when you put on the headset, the first thing you saw was an exact replica of the white room. This was kind of our transition space to make it clear that you hadn't gone anywhere yet. And once the kind of experience unfolded, we're in the white room, but we're not really restricted by reality. So parts of the walls kind of fell away. There were some animations that kind of came up actually through the floor, and some other kind of things that just were kind of beyond reality, but still within that kind of familiar space, the white cube. After these different experiences unfolded, the room reconfigured itself. So you were back in the white cube, and then you could remove the headset and be in the physical white cube. So this was a really simple kind of design idea, but with the goal of making that experience feel consistent throughout, the kind of physical space and the virtual space matching on entry and exit. And those transitions in this case were very discrete. So you're in the physical space, then you're in the virtual space. But we're going to be moving to experiences where that's continuous, that's not going to be as easily, compartmentalized as something like this. So I think the challenges, they grow, and there's a lot of interesting research to be done there. I also wonder, when we're thinking about immersive technologies, is how do we design for kind of possible futures or near futures? When we're talking about social factors of AR, we're trying to design for this future that doesn't quite exist yet, this future where everybody has a wearable device on all the time. And so it creates some challenges. How do we design for these futures, these near futures, or even just evaluate kind of our prototypes for these near futures? So one of the methods that we use actually is we kind of call it maybe on the street or in the wild. So we actually go and we take people out to public settings and kind of expose them to these experiences. In some cases, we are Wizard of Ozing some of the kind of interactions. In other cases, we really just want to expose them to what is existing now. So this particular study that we did over the summer here in Glasgow, actually, we focused on using the Quest 2. We were slightly cruel to our participants in that we required them to always use the hand tracking. And I say cruel because it was proved challenging in the variety of settings that we were working in, but also the types of gestures you have to perform when using hand tracking are known to us to be some of the least socially acceptable. But we brought them to a variety of real public settings. So some places on campus. I'll go through a couple different images that I like from this particular study. And we exposed them to these different spaces. And the main comparisons that we were making was the level of reality that we brought into VR. So we used things like the hand tracking, so your hands were there. In this case, we used the Quest's couch functionality. So this bench that he's sitting on would be visible in VR. We also looked at things like using pass-through view as the kind of world background versus a fully virtual background. So for example, if you're sitting here and you have pass-through on, you will see the people walking around you. We also used the keyboard that I showed the video of so that people in some of the conditions were typing on a physical keyboard that they could see, and they could see their hands, and they could be in different kind of levels of reality. So in this case, this is a kind of exposure study. So we had people in outdoor settings like this. We had them in kind of indoor settings. This is a study space in the, I forget which building, the JMC, I think. And again, we made them use hand tracking. We wanted to really get them using their bodies as they interacted with this device. And sometimes they could see through the pass-through view. Sometimes we had that disabled. We had them in all sorts of places. So for example, here outdoors, again, with the bench. So you would, if you look down in VR, you would see the bench that you were sitting on. This is the example with the keyboard. And again, so you would see the physical keyboard. You would also see the work surface that would be visible in VR. And depending on kind of which condition they were participating in, as I say, they would either see the outside world or they'd see a fully virtual environment. So this was I thought this was quite fun over the summer. We found a few different interesting things, and one thing that I didn't really expect. My hypothesis was that the more reality that we bring into VR, the more acceptable and the more comfortable people will feel. That's unfortunately not true. We found kind of two archetypes of people. One who prefers to shut out the reality. There was a huge number of the participants, about half, who felt that they'd rather not see or know that people were looking at them, and it made them extra uncomfortable when they could see people. And a complete opposite to that, there was a group of people who said, well, I saw that there were people there. I could see that they weren't looking at me or coming up to me. So actually that was much better. I felt very comfortable. So there was no good, one size fits all, certainly not. The social factor here was definitely split into kind of different types of users. And we found a few other things. We're still analyzing the data from this, but this is kind of, as I say, using our kind of current devices to expose people to kind of possible futures. We also, because this was an experiment that we were running over the summer. This was stewarded by an experimenter, which may also kind of give people a little bit, kind of get them over their social inhibitions. They're there with someone else. So we also, I would like to in the future run this in a less controlled manner, but we'll see. I like the Quest 2 because of the pass-through view, and now, as I say, some of its peripheral devices that can be brought into reality. It's bringing us much closer to this continuous space between virtuality and reality than we are now. So just to kind of wrap up, what are the open things, the open challenges that I'm thinking of, is particularly on this idea of these always-on immersive devices. That's the part of immersive tech that gets me excited. You might see, something like this. This is the Magic Leap. You're not going to be going around in your daily life wearing this device. It's pretty special, but this is kind of, it is a device that's available and it does work. I mean, it physically works in those settings, but it doesn't socially work yet. However, the kind of device I'm wearing on the other photo, just these glasses, you may not be aware, but this is also an immersive device. This is audio channel only, but this is the Bose frames. I am so sad that these, the R&D for this was discontinued because these are really exciting. 3 degrees of freedom tracking and a private audio source kind of in your ear. And these are completely wearable. Besides being the kind of person who might be wearing sunglasses at night, these are totally normal to wear. And I've had a few situations where these are actually quite significantly augmenting experience. So for example, one time when we were allowed to go outside and socialize, I was in an unfamiliar city and I was wearing these glasses. I was going out to dinner with a bunch of my colleagues. And I often listen to the walking directions on my frames. And so I was like, okay, guys, I know where we're going, let's go. Everyone thought I knew where the restaurant was because the walking directions are very good. They tell you when to turn, kind of where to look to find where, signs you're looking for. And when we got to the restaurant, I said, oh yeah, usually she says that we're here, but I think this is the place. And nobody had realized that I was using this immersive device to kind of look competent and look like I know where I'm going. It's likewise sometimes very negative. So also when I first started using these devices, I was sitting at a table in a park listening to some music. Someone came up to me and was kind of talking to me, and I thought they were asking for money. And I was just like, no, like I don't have any money, And they wouldn't leave. And I kind of didn't really know how to get the music to turn off. I didn't hear what they were saying. They wanted the other chair from my table. So I looked like a real jerk. Yeah, it was kind of a really negative experience in that case of shutting off reality. The audio is loud enough that it occludes reality. But that's all just to say that these types of immersive devices are starting to be integrated already into our lives. I mean, even as we sit here speaking, I'm actually wearing one such device, the Ray-Ban stories. They're here. So thinking about kind of the social factors and times where we look competent and times where we look disengaged or incompetent, both of these scenarios are easily supported by immersive devices. So I'm still thinking quite a lot around reality also that seamlessly blends physical and virtual content. It's interesting because, yeah, we are quite far away from a future where we can't distinguish physical and virtual, but I definitely think that's on the trajectory. So thinking about some of those challenges now, how we experience our transitions and how we actually anchor our experiences in the real or the virtual is a huge open question. And finally, I'm also quite interested in some of the ethics of immersion and responsible immersion, and thinking about what types of application areas we're actually going to be working in and where this future is going. So I think I'm slightly over time. Apologies for that, but thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for having me.